Hello and welcome to Robotic 3D Design for Entertainment. My name is Vitaly, and today I'm gonna show you guys how we can design something like this. This is a robot that is, in terms of its idea, inspired by Gladiator, but also some of the kind of this World War II military aesthetics, which you can see from like the helmet and stuff. So I just wanted to add a mix of different ideas and something that is both familiar and fresh looking. As you can see, based on its weapons, it's got this sword and a shield, which is obviously a more science fiction version of some of the medieval weapons. But the time we are done with the design, we will have two versions for its materials and colors. One is more like this sporty yellow looking guy, and the other one will be more like heavy metal, more chunky, more military, more heavy looking, and we will go through basically entire process from initial 3D block out to entire rendering process and detailing and everything. I really hope you will enjoy this. I really hope to share pretty much entire workflow that I use these days for this kind of stuff. So let's go through like just initial overview of the chapters. In the chapter 1, we're going to go through this rough masking model. It's going to be a very quick chapter. We're going to make something simple in ZBrush, just from a sphere using Dynamesh. Then we're going to block out simple shapes for for the shield, for the sword. And in chapter 2, we will go through this initial hard shell, this base pass, which is something that will help us to establish the initial composition for the armor. In chapter 3, we are going to spend in MOI 3D, Moment of Inspiration 3D, which is a CAD software, sorry, and we're gonna use this frame structure to fill the structure underneath, basically underneath the robot shells, the armor shells. In chapter 4, we are going to make robotic muscles. Using sub-D approach, a subdivision modeling approach in Softimage. Chapter 5 we will spend on refining the hard shells and pretty much finalizing all the armor pieces. In chapter 6 we are going back to MOI 3D, where we are going to design the more detailed version of the head piece, of the head mask that is located inside the helmet. Chapter 7 we are going to design a quick hand, and that would be the first time we will introduce KitBash pieces for joints. So it will be a mix of pretty much, all three softwares. Oh, sorry, not all three softwares, but pretty much of different approaches where we do we make a hard metal looking pieces in MOI, then we take it in Softimage, and then we add additional KitBash parts to just quickly finalize a quick concept of the hand. And in chapter 8, we're going to utilize KitBash to introduce the next level of detail to our design. Chapter 9, we will finish some of the accessories like a cloth piece, the weapons, the shield. Chapter 10 will be quite quick. We'll take some of those hard metal parts in ZBrush and do a very quick damage pass. In chapter 11, we will prepare the model for rendering and split the parts based on material, just so we have an easier time to do the rendering later. Chapter 12 will be all about the rendering in Octane. Chapter 13 will be a quick image editing in Lightroom and how we give this a little extra, just spice things up a little bit in Lightroom. In terms of our final images. And after that, we'll take those images in Photoshop. We will add a little bit of edge weathering here and there, some of the decals and some quick touch-ups in Photoshop. And after that, we will do an alternative rendering, this hot yellow, this little bit of what I call a sporty rendering pass back in Octane. So we have quite a lot of stuff to cover. I hope you will enjoy this class, and let's get started. During the first chapter, I'll show you how to use ZBrush to create a blockout, And before we start, I just want to kind of give a quick intro of the tools I'll be using. The most important is using Dynamesh, and I'll be just kind of pulling shapes out, and as we do that, I will be re-dynameshing it as we go to get the density of the geometry enough for me to sculpt on. And I highly recommend to have your Dynamesh option set up as a separate on your top bar of your UI, or just use hotkeys for that. In terms of the brushes, I'll be using a standard move brush, standard brush, inflate brush, soft polish brush, and one custom made brush, which is the, call it pinch custom. This is something that combines pinch brush with the standard brush. And the reason why I like it, because you can identify and you can create crisp edges while keeping your topology relatively low. And I just like it during this block out stage because it allows me to create this plate forms, just armor shell looking sections really fast, or just even create nice crisp transitions without without the need to subdivide the geometry anymore. So let me just show you how to make it. First, you just need a standard pinch brush, and once you have this selected, you can go to brush, curve, turn on AccuCurve. Then you go to modifiers, set your modifier like around 65, and then what you want to do also is set up your focal shift pretty high. 65 or 70 would suffice. Also use the intensity a little higher as well, so that would create maybe it's a little too high on the focal shift. Yeah, that's better. So that would create this brush that would be quite useful during the first stage. Other than that, that's pretty much the standard tools. And so let's get started. I started with just a standard sphere, and I usually would check first. I would turn on my symmetry, and that way I can work on both sides at the same time. And I would constantly switch between different brushes like move brush and pinch custom brush to get both the outline and also the crisp edge. And as you can see, I already started using Dynamesh fairly early, and the reason for that is that I want to maintain the density of polygons consistent, and also I want to keep my overall poly count quite low, because this is a good habit for this stage, at least for me, to prevent me from going into details very soon, very early. So having this low topology, low poly count helps to stay focused on only on big shapes, and combining this with a pinch custom allows me to still introduce crisp edge if I need to, but without the temptation to go into details just yet. So this is this forced. They create this forced environment for yourself to really think about big shapes and how the shapes relate to each other, and things like that. So the one thing I like doing when I create blockouts for robots is I start to think early on which parts are separate in terms of the big blocks. And as you can see, like the head, the upper torso, and the lower, the abdomen plus the pelvis are all separate shapes. And same goes to the shoulders. And the reason for that is, obvious reason is that it helps me to treat them as separate objects. And this is helpful for when you're working on robots using this approach with Dynamesh, because it's much easier to create the mechanical looking shapes when you treat them separately, than instead of trying to get both the correct shape and the right flow. Once we establish, once we establish the overall shapes and overall relationship between the shapes in terms of positioning, the basic composition, we can combine all of the subtools into one and re-dynamesh the whole thing again in order to make a one solid mesh that now we can sculpt on. We can treat it as a whole, and now we can use that to really tweak things in a way so it looks good, and it also responds to like whatever the requirements for this design are. As I mentioned at the beginning, and as you can see based on the final images, right? My goal and my design idea here is to create this robotic character for entertainment design field, which could be for movies or video games, inspired by Gladiator and some of the more, with a mix of a little bit of this military aesthetics, to give it a little bit of this aggressive flavor, and with the primary goal that, you know, in some fictional universe, this robot could be, you know, a fighter robot in a melee combat scenario. And the idea for that is like, you know, okay, we need to make sure this robot looks very strong, athletic, for the sake of creating this entertainment sport fact, to give this like this entertainment sport factor, to give this give a flavor of a robot that can really, you know, kick some ass. And one thing about you know, gladiators that I already keep in mind as we start is that I want to make sure that I keep some of that musculature look, some of this exposed muscle look that, you know, you could see in the actual historical gladiators when they would keep their arms exposed, or like part of the chest is exposed. And this is important even at this stage, because I want to, as I'm blocking out the shape and on only big forms, even if it's just big forms, in my mind I want to start visualizing what this could look like as a final design. And basically you're trying to fill this gap, taking a very deliberate approach to making decision as you go, what to do, what not to do. So as you can see, I already combine all the parts in one mesh, like basically merging all subtools into one and then applying Dynamesh. So now I can really fix the overall flavor, the overall gesture of the body. And the most important thing here for me is the gesture and the basic structure, and obviously the relationship between the big parts. Because I'm not trying to solve the design here just yet, obviously, like we're just started like 10 minutes ago, right? And the thing about this is I am looking at this more of a roadmap for the design creation rather than the design itself. So I'm thinking only in terms of big shapes and only establishing myself an overall gesture that, you know, would be fun to take to the next level and create an actual design from. So that's the most important thing. The second most important thing would be to define what exactly we want to model here, what exactly we want to show, and what exactly we don't want to show. And that's important in terms of from the productivity standpoint. Basically with this class, what I'm trying to do is to simulate a real work environment when I create something for a client. And obviously if it's a first pass, I need to be quick with it, but also want to show something good, that something is good enough and worthy of, you know, for client to look at and give me the first feedback, right? And in order to do that, you want to be very strategic about decisions that you make, where you want to spend your effort on. That's why you can see me barely doing anything at the back, right? And also that's why you see me barely doing anything below the middle of the thigh, right? So we'll maybe a little around the knee as well, but not so much. And you can also see that when I started, I was thinking, well, maybe we're only gonna see the mid, we're only gonna crop the character up to the thigh and don't need to do anything else. So as I'm thinking that, I decided to bring this early block out into Softimage, which, you know, in your case, if you don't use this software, it could be any other polygonal model software, or you can even stay in ZBrush if you're comfortable with making simple polygonal shapes like this. In my case, I'm going to be using Softimage as the software where I assemble everything. So this is kind of my final point where all the parts come together before I take them to render. So I just did like a very quick rough shape for the shield. Now I'm doing the same thing for this very simple, very blocky, you know, very ugly looking sword at this point, just to get the proportions right. Because as I'm doing this, I'm realizing that my initial idea to present the character from excuse me, from the head all the way to the middle of the thigh might not be working, because with this length of this character's arms and the sword and the shield, it would be more beneficial to also show the knee and maybe even part of the shin, right? Part of the lower leg. So that is very important to realize as early as possible, because you, from one point, you don't want to spend too much time on anything that's relevant, but at the same time, you want to establish a good foundation for the next iterations to come. So as you can see already, this looks more realistic in terms of how we would present the character once we fully render it. Now I'm going to take this model in Moyi 3D, and this is a CAD modeling software. At this stage, by the way I imported here is it's a script for Moyi, and if you just Google Moyi 3D Moyi 3D OBJ, or just OBJ to Moyi 3D, you will find a few different options. So the reason why we're in this software already, because I know that for this character I want to add some kind of this cloth, like, you know, almost like this loin cloth or something that is hanging, and it's just like gives the sense of this warrior, that robot warrior design that mixes both the medieval aesthetics and some of the just more modern technical, like high-tech stuff to it, in a character that is both interesting and also kind of fresh looking. And at the same time, I'm thinking about this design in terms of, well, if in a real world setting where these robots are primarily for a show, for entertainment, when this robot could fight another robot, maybe we could make them, and maybe we should make them cool enough to entertain them as public. So I'm thinking, well, a piece of cloth would look really cool in dynamic, and that's the primary reason why I want to add that. Now, the reason why I'm in Moyi doing this, because it's very easy, at least for me, to use those splines and draw curves to make a simple torn cloth like that. And when you export that stuff from Moyi, by setting aspect ratio limit to 1 when it's an OBJ export, you can keep your topology you can keep the density even, and also you can keep them more squarish, right? So the shape of each polygon is more close to square, which is good for the simulation. And I'm doing this first pass alignment of the cloth to the body of the robot character using a standard lattice tool, which is, let's say if you're using 3D Studio Max, it could be FFD tool. And I'm also adding this initial kind of folds to it to give it more of a sense that this is a flexible fabric or cloth material, whatever. And here, I'm doing things like filter edges, which reduces all the redundant edges or points to reduce the polygon count and make the geometry a little bit cleaner. So once we're done with that, we're gonna take this piece of geometry to Maya, and the reason for that is that I just want to do a very quick end cloth simulation and basically just drape this cloth on top of the character with pretty much like in 2 clicks. And to me, this is just very simple, very fast to do. You could probably do all that from scratch in Marvel's Designer, or even just just sculpt that. It's not a very crazy looking piece of cloth in terms of that you need to spend a lot of time on sculpting, right? So this is more about your personal preferences and using the tools that you're comfortable with. So as you can see, I just draped it over the character. We got this initial hanging looking fabric. I'm gonna adjust some of the settings. In this particular case, I'm thinking like, well, maybe if I give it a little bit more mass, or maybe I can adjust the rest length scale to give it a little bit different look, and maybe like reduce the stretch resistant and increase the rest angle to scale the so basically to make sure that the fabric doesn't stretch too much while we're scaling the edges to get a little bit more creases and folds there. And once I import that back to Softimage, I realized that because I'm using a symmetrical piece of cloth here, you can actually see that those are not symmetrical, I mean identical, right? The front copy of the cloth is the same as the back, right? So in order to make them look a little bit different, I'm trying to do what would be the minimal I could do to make that impression, the minimum amount of work, and which is, well, I could just fill those holes so it doesn't look like it was the same piece was flipped over there. And here you can see me the basic tools of that, basic polygonal tools, merging edges, cutting, reducing, filling the gaps, and so forth. Here I also realized it would look a little cooler that it would be a little lower, so it doesn't look like it's way too high on this guy's waist. I thought it was looking a little bit goofy that way. This looks a little just aesthetically to me, looks a little more pleasing. And again, the reason why I want to do it at this stage is because I want to get the context for what I need to do for the next, let's say, 8 hours, for the entire working day, as early as possible. It's very important to be clear about what is your final goal and being able to predict how much time it takes, what concerns or what other potential issues may happen on the way there to your final goal. I also thinking at this point, well, what if I try to do and one of the arms to make to give him a little bit of the armor similar to how Gladiator had. And at this point I'm still not fully sure about this idea, because I realized that the shield on the left arm is already covering a lot of the arm. So if I will do all those muscles, I might not be able to see it because of this armor. But still, I'm trying to do a quick test to see if I want to commit to it or not. Eventually I will realize that I don't really want to do it, because I want to really show off the muscles and the frame on the arms. And but at this point I'm still trying to give it a quick shot, right, to see if that would be cool. As you can see, I use like a simple one-sided armor shell piece, and then I just duplicate it, and let's see if this is any good. Okay, so I think at this point we're pretty close to calling this initial masking model good enough for me to make my initial estimate for what needs to be done. Looking at this, I see that the sword was too big for just a one-handed sword. Even now it's like quite big for one-handed. He obviously, this character wouldn't need the grip that long, and but still I think it's just gonna look a little cooler. Plus, this is not a human; it's a very strong robotic character. So we're going more for the impression rather than try to make it fully functional robot at this point, and try to create a story that looking at this robot you can sort of read what this design is all about. So let's jump to the next chapter. During this stage we're going to do a basic armor shell pass using pretty much the same workflow that I use to do retopology, and which means you can use any 3D modeling software for that, where you can create polygons on top of existing shape while maintaining the points on the mesh underneath, right? So in Softimage, in order to do this, all you have to do is turn on snap by surface, and if you go to File, Preferences, Tools, Polygon, and turn off Preserve Planarity during creation, that would allow you to create polygons on top of existing shape, and in a similar fashion like if you would do any retopology. So this is something what you could do in Softimage, but you can also use this in any other software. So for example, let me create a sphere, and just to kind of demonstrate what we are going to do. In certain cases I make the mesh underneath transparent. Imagine the sphere, this is the base mesh we're going to use, right? So I would copy material, and let's say I will take my transparency slider, assign the material, so now you can see through. So if you press N, which is a standard Softimage hotkey for creating new polygons, you can now create a polygon shape on top, right? And the thing is, about this stage, what's so important is that we are going to try to describe the future shapes of the armor in the most economical, in terms of the poly count, in terms of point count, in the most economical way. And the reason for that is because once we have a lot of those polygon planes, we really want to make sure it's easy to change things. So it's important to not overload yourself, like overload your scene and with the bunch of redundant polygons, because once you want to tweak things, once you want to change the overall composition, the overall placement, it would be very hard to do, and we clearly don't want that. So for example, let's say imagine this would be my future, the armor shell that I want to use. If I only keep this to this, if I only keep the poly count this low, it's very easy to change things in terms of its overall shape. So for example, like I don't need a lot more polygons to describe the overall design of this future armor plate. And we're going to talk more in detail regarding its design, but I just want to really show the basic workflow when I start doing things like that before I speed things up in the video in the next few minutes. Now let's apply the same principle, the same approach to the blockout that we just created. I'm starting with the ribcage outline, and the main idea here is that while I'm doing this basic polygon shapes, while I'm creating those shapes, I want to make sure I visualize what's going to happen after I finish them and what's going to happen behind the shapes in terms of its negative space, in terms of its overall structure underneath. And it's important to keep in mind that at this stage you want to find a good balance between being very flexible in terms of not really committing to any shape just yet, but also trying your best to really try to make a shape as as good looking as possible, just with a few points, right? The thing about this is that if you haven't done a whole lot of designs like that in the past, I highly recommend to start practicing with something very simple, and not try to just really complete the entire robot in one pass. I've done this for quite a while now, and for me it's easier right now to visualize the entire robot and all the smaller shapes as one cohesive design, as one fluid, as a one fluid semi-organic robot, right? And if you do this for the first time, it might be difficult and might be overwhelming, because if you look at what's going on right now, you don't really see anything that looks particularly cool just yet. And what you're establishing is a second layer of foundation for your future design. And the base mesh underneath, which is what the blockout that I made in ZBrush, is only a spatial map for me to create my design. It's not really a guide mesh in terms of creating an actual design. It's more just about where the armor plates would be placed on. And this approach is not necessarily what everyone should do, because I'm comfortable with this, because this allows me the freedom to create those armor plates in a way where I come up with a lot of cool ideas on the fly. So for example, if you're having a hard time doing this, what you could do instead is to spend a little more time in ZBrush on the blockout stage and define your design a little more. So when it comes to armor plates, when it comes to part lines between the hard shells and, let's say, soft body shells, you could just do that. You could do all that in ZBrush just using standard brush and cut out those lines for you to see once you get to this stage. And so this is just one of the ways how you could do this. And for me, the reason why I'm doing this is because I feel like I'm saving a lot of time. I've had this experience in the past where I would really spend quite a bit of time in ZBrush and have this really cool looking block out. And the problem with that for me is that once you have those intricate lines, those intricate shapes done all in ZBrush, I spend way more time on retopology, because I really now have to create more points to make this shape really work as a 3D model, as a sub-D model. And the problem with that for me is that one of the first basic rules for sub-D modeling is that if you want to try to keep your point count to minimum, because it's easier to control and because you will get a cleaner result once you subdivide that. So that's very important. And so as you can see, like here, I'm already getting to the point where I already got some I got quite a few shapes already. So what I would do sometimes, I would turn off the block out ZBrush model underneath just to see overall composition of the shapes underneath. And this is a good time to really take a careful look at your future sub-D shells, at the future armor shells, in terms of their hierarchical structure of the size relationship between each other. And it might sound like very complicated, but in reality, it's not really. It's what you want to make sure you do is you maintain the readability of each shape in terms of its which shape is dominant over the other in terms of size, in terms of its rhythm, and in terms of its direction, how it's pointed, and things like that. So, for example, I got this. If you look at the chest area, we got this very narrow, like diamond-looking shape here, and it's at an angle and it's quite large, right? So to complement the large armor piece, I would create a smaller piece next to it. And by establishing hierarchy, what I mean is that whenever you have two pieces next to each other, you want to be very clear about which one is bigger, which one is more dominant, and which shape creates a primary scale, like a bigger scale, right? And which one is more secondary, which one is more complementary. So that way you can really make a nice composition between which shape will bring, which shape will pick up more attention at the beginning, and at the beginning of your of your client looking at your model, and which shape will be more secondary in terms of its. That will be the second thing that people will notice when they look at the model, things like that. And you will also see how I really barely spend any time on working on anything on the back. And this is the time I already know that I will not be rendering anything on the back for the sake of saving a lot of time on the model. And sometimes I wouldn't spend a lot of time. I wouldn't spend any time at all on the back for this stage, for the first pass design. But I would still look at the back just to make sure the overall structure is good there. And if it looks like I still got some detail there, just because I would, you can see the structure, or you can see some armor shell underneath, I would still render it from the back. And you can always show some work in progress images as long as you have something more finished to support that. So, for example, by the end of this masterclass, we'll get this design, that model that we can, we can render from every angle. But from every angle, from every front angle, like direct front, a 3/4 front, but it doesn't really look finished from the back. So what you can do, you can render a partial back view, and you can always tell like this is work in progress, but you can already start getting feedback. You already can show what overall flavor for what you want to do for the design for the specific area, if that makes sense. So as you can see, I'm working on the arms now, on the hands as well, and I'm only trying to focus on the big shapes at this point. And as you can see, I just selected all of the shapes to make this initial estimate of what the negative space is going to be once I'm finished. And this is where I already start to pull vertices out from the masking model underneath to create a so-called form accent. Because if you look at it, like the ZBrush model underneath is very sort of mushy, this very just soft kind of piece of clay, right? It doesn't have any accents. So you want to be aware of that, because if you directly retopo everything one-to-one, you will lose a lot of the design accents in terms of like sharp transitions, sharp angles. And so you want to be really cautious about that. This is the time where I can already symmetrize and look at the armor as a whole. And by the time you get to this stage, you already want to be clear about the ratio between how much of the character will be covered in armor and how much of the character will be more exposed with its internal parts. And as I mentioned earlier, this robot is inspired by idea of this melee gladiator robot. And because of that, I really don't want to fully cover it in armor. I don't want to look like a completely this military armor looking robot, or I don't want to look like just where it's got armor everywhere for the armor's sake. So I want to make sure like we sell a little bit of this muscular robotic look while maintaining the good balance between the exposed parts like cybernetic muscles or frames underneath and also the armor.